And it will be shared later on as well for all the ones who've missed it on social media. So be aware of that. So I've started the recording now, just that you know. Today we're talking about design thinking, creating a creative workspace to drive innovation in Japan. With us is Brittany Arthur. Brittany specializes in innovation and design thinking, as well as design sprints in Japanese. She's the founder and managing director of Design Thinking Japan, a very fitting name. And she's also the host and producer of the Business Karaoke podcast, a show you should definitely check out on LinkedIn, I think, is where you post mostly. So that's where I see it all the time. She serves also as on the Met Connector board of directors as an advisor for innovation and strategic partnership in LATAM, if I pronounce it correctly. And she's also a passionate Rotarian, so a member of the Rotary Club, particularly the Rotary Club of Berlin International, where I'm currently actually located, and has also held several positions there, including the Rotary Foundation Scholar position, the president of the Rotaract Club in Berlin, and the vice chair of the Rotary International Joint Committee for Young Leaders and Alumni Engagement. She's also a member of the Australian and New Zealand Chamber of Commerce in Japan, and contributes to the creation of new industry knowledge. So she has said in her introduction herself that she wakes up every day very excited to ignite creativity and innovation at the Japanese workplace, and I really like that. And she does so by equipping people with tools for change, and she will do exactly that in this webinar. But I will give the word to her in a few seconds as well. I just want to quickly say that this webinar is organized by the TIU E-Track Alumni Association. This is the board, you know us. And Brittany, maybe I'm going to ask to unmute you. Maybe you can tell us a bit, first of all, why did you come to Japan? What is your interest in design thinking? How did you find that interest? And what made you actually stay in Japan and start a whole business? Hi, Brittany.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, everyone. It's really such a pleasure. I'm really excited to be here. If you haven't already, certainly go ahead in the chat. I would love this to be more of an interactive experience, because I think certainly I can share a little bit about what I know, but there's so much, I think, knowledge, information on the call that I certainly would love if you could connect amongst each other. So certainly go ahead and do that. For everyone that has already connected in the chat, I thank you. So to the question of why Japan, I'll give you the short answer, and then if you want me to expand, you can tell me. So the very short answer is that when I was about 10 years old, my Japanese teacher, so I'm originally Australian, that's probably relevant to know here, and in Australia it's actually quite common to have a second language be an Asian language. So maybe it's Japanese, maybe it's Indonesian, things like that. So at my school it was Japanese, and my Japanese teacher walked in and started writing up, from top to bottom and from right to left. And I just remember thinking, I would love to do that one day. So that's the short answer. But obviously you need a little bit more essence, or a little bit more quality behind a reason to build a career in Japan, because anyone on the call knows it's not easy. It's not easy. Working in Japan, managing a Japanese environment is certainly a unique experience in itself. And actually I didn't necessarily just stay in Japan. So what happened was I was about 17 and I went to Kagoshima in Kyushu. That was my first student exchange experience. After that, I went to university and studied a double bachelor degree in Japanese and business. I had the opportunity to then kind of do half my studies in Osaka at Kansai Gaidai, maybe some of you know, in Hirakata. And then after that, I had the opportunity to work with some, after graduating, I worked with some German multinationals. It was funny because during my studies, I interned at the Australian Chamber of Commerce. And they said, if you're going to work in Japan, work for the Germans, because you get good holidays, you get good, reasonable pay, and you also get reasonable conditions, right? So if you have a sick day, they don't expect you to kind of fall in the door and, ganbarimashou, ganbarimashou. So then I have this idea, so the Germans have, were good employees. So go work for the Germans, which I did. And then in 2011, there was the 3月11日, so the 3/11, the March 11 earthquake. I was in Tokyo, Roppongi Ichome, working for Mercedes-Benz, and there was that huge earthquake. At that time, I was then transferred essentially to Germany, and that was around the time when I started thinking, well, it started a little bit early already, but I started thinking there's got to be a better way about how we manage work and collaboration in Japan, because I was working for a German company. I was working essentially on the Japanese side, but I was Australian. So I'm looking back and forth thinking, I don't think people are really understanding what's going on here, and it had nothing to do with the language, it had everything to do with mindset and culture and communication. You have the Germans that will say things like, yes, no, that's stupid, and then you have the Japanese that are like, chotto kangaimashou, like, let's, and things like, so you have these two different cultures. And I remember thinking, this is expensive, this meeting. We have people flown in from Germany. They've taken a week out. Often, they'll be leaving their families, things like that for a week. So we're here and we're in this room. We've got to make sure that we make the most of the time. And sometimes the workshops would go well and sometimes they wouldn't. And it was simply chance. It was really simply chance. And I thought there's got to be a better way. And exactly around that time, I started reading a book by an author named Dan Pink, who started talking about that the new leader will be a left brain, right brain leader, meaning you need equal analytical skills as you do creativity skills. And that's when I started learning about design thinking. And then when I got sent to Germany, I thought this is a perfect opportunity for me to then go to the D school. So there's two main D schools in the world. One is in California in Stanford. The other one is at the HPI in Berlin, or more of a Potsdam. And that's where I went for a year. And I thought immediately, I'm going back to Japan. I'm taking this design thinking back to Japan. But as we all know, I'm pretty sure I have some people on the call that might appreciate this. Sometimes things take much longer in Japan than you anticipated. So what I thought would probably happen around 2013-14 ended up happening around 2017. Oh. And so since then, yeah, that's kind of been the back to Japan story.
Right, I see. So you got actually into design thinking, all of that in Germany. So I was wondering about that because I looked at your profile and saw the Hasso-Plattner Institute you were referring to. I was very surprised to see that. Thanks so much. So how long has it been now that you're actually in Japan? It must have been a long time by now.
Yeah, that's right. So since 2017, essentially, I'm just writing the name of the book there. It's called A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink. So Daniel Pink, but that's honestly probably 10 years old now, that book. So if you want updated information, I can find an updated book for you as well. Yeah, so I first went to Japan in 2005. So I really saw the Japan where I would be in, I was in Kaoshima, which is the most southern point of the most southern island. And I was in the supermarket, and I had an old lady come up to me and say, "You're the first foreigner I've ever seen with my own eyes." Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, wow, this is 2005. We're not talking, just after Meiji Restoration or anything like that. We're talking about quite like modern times. And I remember thinking, she really said to me, 初めて見た外国人さんですよ. And I was like, wow, yeah. 2005年. 2005.
In 2005, wow. Yeah, it's incredible how it can be in Japan sometimes.
And so, but then now back in this context as a professional since 2017.
All right, cool. Thanks so much. So before you start your webinar on what design thinking is, we kind of want to know what the audience actually already knows. So I've prepared a very simple poll for all of you. It would be great if you could answer it. I'm going to relaunch it now and you'll be able to answer it. It's basically, have you heard of design thinking before? Because we're basically a mixed group here of young working professionals, current students, and it's a colorful mix. So we kind of wanted to see who is here, who has some knowledge. And I can see already, I'm going to show the results in a bit, that lots of the people or attendees know about design thinking, but actually don't know what it is. So Good that you're here, Brittany. And there's some as well who have used it before, so that's also quite interesting to see. All right, I'm gonna end polling now and then share the results with everyone so that you can see it. You can see the majority knows about it, but actually don't know exactly what it is. And then there's a good amount of people are having an idea of what it is or don't know actually what it is at all. So I'm going to stop share the results. And since we have so many people already, not exactly sure what design thinking is, I think we can move on and leave the second poll question at the side, because that would have been more for experienced attendees. So Brittany, if you would like to share your slides, go ahead, and I would give the word completely to you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to go through a little bit of kind of content for around 20 minutes. And then what I would love if we can then open the floor for questions or for discussion. I think this is a really special space because, you know, working in Japan, working in innovation, you know, and then also having kind of like a foreign lens to it. Maybe you're Japanese in a foreign company or you're a foreign in a Japanese company. It's a very unique community, and I'm really a fan of connecting and sharing and learning from each other. So what I would love is that as I'm going along and you have a question, use our chat really as really as a notebook. You know what I mean? Use it as a notebook so you can, you know, don't forget questions, things like that. Write it in the chat, and then we can go ahead like that, and then we'll jump into Q&A after that. So yeah, I'm really loving the fact that you've picked up the chat, because I think it's really so important. I actually heard from a contact of mine. He said the way that he checks in with his team is through through an emoji. So rather than kind of getting in and asking, you know, how are you, he'll get everyone to write an emoji, which I really like. So what we're going to do today is not necessarily go through. I'm going to set a timer because I can talk about this really all day because I love it. So I'm going to set a timer. What we're going to do is we're going to talk less about what design thinking is, and we're going to talk more about how we see it in the workplace and what that then means, particularly in this post or, you know, Corona world, what that then means. So I thought I just went to Japanese because the majority of my presentation, I almost said yes. Thank you so much for joining. I know that everyone is very busy. You have 1,000 other things to do. So the fact that you're here with us, I really appreciate it. So let's begin. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about how to ignite creativity and innovation in a Japanese workplace. So I can share a little bit about my other experiences, but today we're really going to talk about the Japanese workplace. And why, you know, why are we going to talk about that? Is that I believe that in order to really catapult or to catalyze creativity and innovation in the Japanese workplace, what we need to do is equip people with tools, with real tools. We don't need to say, you know, be more creative, things like that. You think, you know, what does that mean? How do I even begin? So I'll often hear from a foreign manager, my Japanese team doesn't have any ideas, or my Japanese team don't have any opinions. And I've found this not to be the case at all. It's not the fact that they don't have opinions. It's not the fact that they don't have ideas. It's the environment in which we're either trying to get ideas or share ideas isn't conducive for sharing. So that's what we're going to talk about. And, you know, let's think about this COVID crisis. As much as that it's been, you know, really a tough time for many people, it's catapulted change. So I had an upcoming episode of my Business Karaoke podcast will feature the global or the marketing director, the Japanese marketing director for Dropbox. And he was talking about how they had a case that they probably would have never had if it wasn't for COVID. So they were in Kumamoto-ken, so down in the south, and they were able to take Kumamoto and help them transfer their documents and to implement or to utilize cloud technologies. This is something that, as much as, you know, and for the Japanese either natives or people that know Japan, know that there's this global image that Japan is super technology driven, super advanced, everything, you know, super Tokyo, Shibuya, neon lights, but they don't know about the Japan where you can't pay with a card at a restaurant, or that you can't pay with a Suica in a taxi. You know what I mean? Like that there's certain taxis only take cash or whatever, you know, so they only know about that kind of futuristic Japan. They don't know about this other side where naka hanko and naka do another copy and all these crazy things. So the global COVID crisis has really reminded us that there is opportunity in crisis. So what we want to do is think about how can you as a professional, or even if you're a student, you as a student, how can you prepare and reset your position and your skills to become more innovative. So design thinking, people can kind of make it very difficult and complex to understand. Design thinking is really only two things. It's number one, it's a set of tools. It's a set of tools, like it's a toolbox. You can use different tools. So for example, you know, think about it even like when you're cooking. You use a knife for certain things, you use a spoon for other things. And, you know, if you use a spoon when you need a knife, well, it's going to be less effective, you know, things like that. But more importantly to understand design thinking is that it's a mindset. And the design thinking mindset is really important when we're building a post-COVID world, because the design thinking mindset is really based on the idea that we develop, design, innovate, we create products, we create services for people, always with people in mind. And the other thing is that we become a learning organization, that we're an organization that we launch to learn. We don't, you know, necessarily always launch to succeed, we launch to learn. So what we do in design thinking is we begin with empathy, which is that kind of definition phase, that we focus on the user and we want to understand them. The reason this is really important is because what humans end up saying what they need versus what they do need can often be different. So I'll give you an example when we were working in an HR setting. So this particular company had a very high level of turnover. They would see people quit really quite high levels. And we started, digging deeper. And usually if we didn't implement a design thinking approach, you might do things like, well, give them money, or put in a casual Friday, or a foosball table, or whatever. But actually what we ended up finding was that this particular company would send their consultants either to places where they would be like the only consultant on the job, or that they would have, if they were in a team, that it was very difficult for them to communicate or to get support within their team. So what we ended up finding is that you could have implemented any kind of new compensation package, any kind of new foosball or new art or casual Friday. These wouldn't have addressed the problem. The problem is this particular user needed to feel supported. They needed to feel like that their work made sense amongst a larger ecosystem. So this is why we begin with the first part, which is understanding the person. Because before we build it right, we want to build the right it, right? And so this is kind of the way that design thinking can be really just summed up in a sentence. Before building it right, let's make sure we build the right it, right? That's what we need to find out. The second thing is, after we've spoken to our user and we understand what their pain is, we then go and we try to find patterns, right? So in the need finding phase, that's when we say, okay, what does this data then mean, right? This is where we're looking for meaning. Then we move into, okay, now we have now we've understood these patterns. What can we do about it, right? So that's when we go into ideation. After ideating, so thinking of a new idea, finding a new way to solve the problem, we then build it and test it, right? And so that's kind of really design thinking in a circle. And you'll often see design thinking as a line, but I wanted to use this as a circle because you'll often find people say, well, where does the design thinking end? Well, the answer is it kind of doesn't. You know, it's just kind of this iterative approach. So, you know, what does that mean for innovation and what does that mean for us? So we move from this traditional strategy of, you know, we only work in one particular field, we use historical data, you know, we have that one future in mind, and then we move to this kind of new idea of like an adaptive strategy where, you know, companies are understanding that they're not going to have that one strategy anymore. What we need is maybe an idea of multiple futures, right? And also we need to really repurpose existing assets. So if we think about, you know, the Japanese financial year begins April 1st, right? If we think March, so when they're planning April 1st, like of this year, began planning in the end of 2018, the beginning of 2019, right? Imagine the world then. You know, the world was very different. Japan was banking on revenues from the Olympics, from tourism, from, you know, consistent growth. And then what happens? 2020 hits. We've got the coronavirus. Something historical happens. The Olympics are canceled, or they're put on hold. Can you imagine going to the CEO, the CFO a year ago, 2 years ago, and saying, actually, I wouldn't be so sure on banking, you know, on that income from the Olympics. They think you're crazy. Of course the Olympics are going to happen, you know, but then no, actually, the world that we live in is so different. So it's not really only going to be, you know, there's nothing we can really bank on anymore. There's no certainty, which isn't a problem if we use that uncertainty as a fuel for a reason to become a learning organization or a creative organization. So what we want to do is we want to take the idea that design thinking says before we launch a new product or before we build a new product and just find a market, we want to do the other way. We want to work with our market and then work with the changing world to then, you know, give them new perspectives or to support them. But then I want to talk about in a Japanese setting, what do you really need? So there's some differences between how you run design thinking in a Western setting versus in a Japanese setting. And the first thing that I can encourage you when we're building creative organizations in Japan is that we need management buy-in. You will not be able to have that kind of like table in the shokudo or like a, you know, a certain table in somewhere in the office that you're doing creative things if your management doesn't think it's worthwhile. If your management doesn't buy into the idea that a learning organization is an organization for the future. So as much as we need to do that kind of bottom up approach and we need to be able to skill people, give them tools, help them ideate, we certainly need to do those things. If we don't have that management buy-in at the beginning, in Japan, you'll never really have that rocket ship. And what I mean by rocket ship is in Australia, Japan, Australia, the US, kind of Anglo-Saxon countries, you'll see that they're very fast to launch, but then they're also very fast to kind of trickle off. Whereas Japan is very slow to launch, but then once they launch, all of the resources are aggregated and focused and they, you know, take off like a rocket ship. So what we really need here is we do definitely need that management buy-in in order to build a creative organization. That doesn't mean that the management have the last say or things like that. It just means that the management says, this organization believes in learning, this organization believes in iteration, this organization believes in learning or launching to learn. So I also want to talk about divergent and convergent conversations. I don't know if in your down where it like says like screen share and mute and things like that, do you have your reaction button where you have a thumbs up or the clap? Can you test it for me? Can you see if you can find it? Can everyone find it? Okay, great. Perfect. So I have a question for you. This is the question. Has anyone been in a situation where someone said, I need a new idea. I need a new idea. And you come with a new idea. And you say, what about this idea? And the person who asked you for an idea said, no, it's never going to happen. We don't have the time. We don't have the resources. We don't have the people. And you're like, oh, okay, what about this idea? No, we tried that 2 years ago. That's not going to work either. Has anyone been in this kind of meeting before? Can you give me a thumbs up? Where, so I'm getting a few thumbs. All right. Now I want you to think about, imagine this. Imagine that we have a meeting. We have a meeting for an hour, and we have to make a decision. Our client is waiting on this decision, and if we don't together make a decision, we will not be in time to deliver, and it's going to be disastrous for our supply chain, okay? And we finally come to consensus. Okay, let's do that. Let's do it. yarimashou. And then 5 minutes before we're about to finish, someone puts up their hand and says, you know what? I know we've been discussing about A, but do you mind if we go back and maybe look at B? And you're like, you want to now, 5 minutes before this meeting ends, you want to change the scope and change the focus. You want to go back now? Are you crazy? Has anyone had this happen before? Okay, so can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. In both cases, both people are a problem to innovation. Both people are a problem to creativity, and I'll tell you why. So what we need to do when we want to create a creative organization, when we want to create an innovative organization, what do we need? We need communication and we need speed, right? And so in order for us to implement speed into our communication, we need to create a very, I would almost call it a strict guideline on how and when to communicate. And so one of the principles of design thinking is that we have divergent and convergent conversations. So Hassan Shusok. So Hassan, or divergence, means that we gather data, right? We gather data. This means during the divergence phase, when you're gathering data, I don't care if you don't have the people, the time, the money, the resources. I don't care if you tried it 15 years ago and it didn't work. During the divergence phase, this is not relevant information. If during the divergence phase you have people saying no, 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 you actually can then utilize this, and you can turn it around and say, before you begin the conversation, you can say, okay, for the next 15 minutes, let's diverge. So rather than telling someone to shut up or their ideas are not important or whatever, what we need to do is we need to clearly set expectation. Okay, team, for the next 15 minutes, for the next 20 minutes, we're thinking of ideas only. After that, then certainly we can think about risks and things like that. Then what you'll find after divergence, and also when we come to Japanese, particularly Japanese participants, I always encourage divergence, or ideation, to write down. So if you're in a country, for example, like Germany, and you ask people, who's got an idea? Hands go up. No one has any problem saying what they think. I remember going to university in Germany and a student telling their teacher, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right. My Japanese self, after being in Japan for so many years, died listening to that. You just said that, what? But in Germany, and the teacher or the professor was like, thanks, that's a very good point, but also consider these things. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've never seen such a dialogue before. So what we want to do in Japan is we want to encourage people to write down their ideas. We want to encourage divergent conversations in a written form. Two things happen here. Number one, we can encourage it that you flatten the playing field a little bit. You're not concerned about what is my boss saying, what's the person next to me saying. And the second thing is that you start also, if you're a multinational organization, for example, and you're conducting the ideation session in English, often you'll find the person who talks is the person who speaks English the best. That doesn't mean they have the best ideas. It just means that they're the one that's most comfortable communicating. So what we want is we really want everyone to have a voice. So divergent conversations are written conversations, gives everyone a voice. Convergent. Now, when we talk about convergent conversations, this is equally important because we often will, someone who's like looking at risk, what about this? What about that? Is kind of looked at like a negative person. Why are you being so negative? But it's not about being negative. This person sees a critical risk, for the project. But if you are bringing up critical risks during the divergence phase, you get this kind of reputation of being negative. However, if you bring up risks during the convergent phase, you're actually being very responsible and you're helping the conversation move along. So what we need is we need divergent conversations and convergent conversations. We need ideas, but we also need risks. But what we need more than anything is to really understand how we have those conversations so that we don't lose that critical speed that's required for innovation and creativity. Managing group dynamics is so important. We need to look at how we get groups to communicate or to compete. So if you're in Latin America, they're very competitive, very competitive. You'll have people, if we're, for example, this is a creative matrix where people write down ideas. If these people were, for example, Mexican, and I were to tell each person, I want you, you have yellow post-its, another person has blue post-its, another person has pink post-its, and after the 7 minutes of ideation, I'm going to count the post-its and we'll see who wins. If you create competition within a team in Japan, it doesn't help your goal, really. Competition within a team is counterproductive, whereas competition against teams, for example, okay, you're team A and you're all yellow, and you're team B and you're all blue, then you can kind of leverage that Japanese ganbarimashou ishoni spirit, and then you can translate that into, kind of moving a little faster with a little bit of competition. But managing group dynamics in creating an innovative, creative organization is essential. Encouraging diversity. Diversity in Japan. So for example, I remember when, this is a picture of a workshop I ran. Often when you were dealing with issues of diversity, it has less to do with that the Japanese are not looking for, that they're, pushing women down or young people down or foreigners down or something like that. It's less about that, and it's more about the diversity conversation in Japan is still quite new. So they don't understand when and how you can implement diversity. So what you need to do as either a foreign leader or as a leader that understands creativity and innovation is that you need to then help your Japanese colleagues understand the benefits of diversity. And one of the things that we utilize in Japan, and particularly if we think about why problems exist in the first place. Often problems exist within organizations amongst processes or amongst processes or services because of the people running them, right? Sometimes we create the problems. So if you get these same people to solve the problem, well, they created it, right? So sometimes what we need to do is we need to bring in new ideas. And diversity looks very different. Diversity can even be, it can also be age, it can be gender, it can be even your background. A lawyer approaches a problem very differently to a marketer. An IT professional approaches a problem very differently to a finance professional. So what we need to do here is to become that learning organization, to become that creative organization, we need to encourage diversity. And diversity also means that you bring your whole self to the table. So what does that mean? That means that if you are, for example, a photographer in your spare time, or if you are a cook in your spare time, we actually want you to bring those elements of you to your job. It doesn't necessarily mean that you bake a cake for your colleagues, although I'm pretty sure they'll be happy if you do that. It's about those skills that you developed or that passion that you have, that new lens that you have, that we really want that each person in the organization has a chance to speak up and has a chance to utilize themselves. Creating a creative organization or an innovative organization in Japan is essential to kind of change the dynamics, right? So physical icebreakers, and this is not simply icebreakers, this is physical icebreakers. So, in other, if you use kind of like a mental game, like for example, okay, take this, take this piece of paper and create as many hats as you can or something like that. Honestly, sometimes the Japanese participants are really such, they're erai, they do what you tell them to do. They're like very good participants, you know. But if you give them an instruction, sometimes they'll follow it too seriously. So think about another thing that Japan is famous for, right? They're famous for those crazy TV game shows, right? Those crazy Takeshi's Castle, you know, people get, you know, it's crazy things happening to them, you know. And so remember, this is also Japan, right? This kind of craziness. As much as there's like the shy, reserved, polite Japan, there's this crazy Takeshi's Castle Japanese game show Japan that you're like, how's this the same country, you know? And so if you think about that, what we do there is we have, what we want to do is we want to take people out of their mind, you know, out of their thinking, and use their body to change. So we get them up and moving, because what we want to do is we want to create that environment that you can be different and laugh, you know, to change kind of the feeling in the room. So why we do this, you know, what we want to do is we're looking for ways that we can implement creativity and innovation in the workplace, because we want to begin not from square one, we want to begin from square two, right? So what does that mean? That means we want to take our existing resources and we want to repurpose them. Because if you have, you know, there's a statistic that, you know, 50, I think it's 2 or 3%, 52, but it's certainly the majority. It's 52 or 53% of companies on the globe that are over 100 years old are Japanese companies, right? So think about that. Think about that if there's 50-50, right? 50% is Japan and 50% is the rest of the world. You know, think about that for a second. Like, that's huge. So innately, the Japanese play the long game. And they've been quite successful at playing the long game. At the same time, we do need to change our day-to-day operations and how we keep up or how we map the future. So certainly we need to implement that Japanese resilience for the future, but we definitely also need to change how we operate. We also, you know, through implementing these new ways of working, we can also bring speed to our organizations. We can be clear about the value that we're bringing. And what we want to do is we want to get to doing early. So a creative organization and an innovative organization is a learning organization that learns by doing, not only by thinking. So that's been super quick overview. I honestly, as you might be able to tell, I can talk about this all day. And on that note, I would love to hand it over to you, and maybe we can begin the discussion or questions.
Thanks so much, Brittany, for that. I will allow participants to unmute themselves now. To just start with a very light question to you from my side to kind of kick this off. What are what companies are actually coming to you, and how do they get to you? Mm-hmm. That's kind of out of my curiosity.
Sure. So let's do that. That's hold that thought. What I would encourage anyone else to do, if you have a question, you can ask it in Japanese or English, or also write it in the chat. So like questions, I'm going to write in the chat. Questions go here. If you're thinking about your question, because I know sometimes to think of a question is sometimes a little bit stressful. So go ahead and utilize the chat, so we can go between the chat and people asking their questions. So we're going to use both. So yes, interestingly enough, how do clients find me? So I am obsessed with modernizing the dialogue around doing business in and with Japan, obsessed with it. Because when I went to university with also one of the participants on this called Dean, when Dean and I went to university, the kinds of things that they would tell us about doing business with Japan is make sure you have your meishi, and, you know, I don't know, just super like bubble jidai stuff, you know, it's not useful. And so, for example, I've had the pleasure of working with another person on this called Kado-san. And if we think about what the kind of issues that we were dealing with when we were serving our clients, when we were working together, bringing a meishi was the least of your problems, or was the beginning of the conversation. It wasn't the end. So I'm obsessed with talking about, modernizing the dialogue of doing business in Japan. So I do a lot of content on LinkedIn. A meishi is a business card. That's right, Chen. Yeah, it's a business card. so I'm obsessed with, just talking about it, creating content. So the way that kind of companies usually find me is that they'll run innovative or creative programs already in their offices abroad. And usually their APAC person, their person in charge of APAC, or which is Asia Pacific for people that are not from that region. So APAC person, leader will contact me, or someone from their global team will contact me. But they're usually a foreigner, and and the story usually goes like this: well, we've tried this in Japan, but it hasn't really worked. Or we've done this abroad and we've had real success in our offices in Singapore, in Sydney, or in Ireland, or wherever, but we haven't had the same success in Japan. It's probably because we don't have anyone who speaks Japanese. And for anyone on the call, knows that speaking Japanese is, you're like, okay, if I speak Japanese, it'll be fine. But it's not. Speaking Japanese is really the beginning of understanding that client relationship. So I actually usually connect with companies through their international headquarters, and then they kind of channel me to Japan. But my hope is that I can connect directly more with Japanese companies, but they're not on LinkedIn. They're like on Facebook, and then you get your manager like adding you on Facebook, and foreigners like, oh my gosh, why is my manager on Facebook?
Okay, thanks so much. All of the participants, you now have the chance to actually unmute yourself. And I could see that Arif Suksai, if I pronounce it correctly, had a question already, or raised his hand for a long time ago. So why don't you go ahead and ask a question if you like? Otherwise, I can also. You're definitely unmuted now, so you could speak.
Hello.
Hi.
So my question is that how does the company adapt the design thinking process in which category?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it the HR or it's the
Okay, great question. So there's the simple answer is anywhere, but I'll give you two concrete examples that we see mostly. Number one is in pre-sales. So in the phase of, when you're gathering requirements for customers and the customers are saying, we want to do a project together, but, in Japan, you don't know, the scope of the project is often undefined, which is just a consistent source of headaches. So what we do is in the pre-sales phase, we go in and we run a workshop, for example, a design thinking workshop together, and we'll go in and we'll ask the client, what is it about, what would you like to change? What's giving, what is the problems, without going in and saying, okay, client, here's a solution. And they're saying, hang on, but this isn't our problem. So pre-sales is a really great way to use design thinking in order to speed up creativity and innovation in the workplace, because it helps you launch, test, and implement new business quite quickly, especially if we think about this Corona time. There's been a lot of really lost cash, that people are counting on. So we need to, Kaizen, the cost saving, is not going to be enough anymore. We need to inject new resources into the workplace. So pre-sales is a great way. The second way is, as you mentioned, is in that kind of professional education, teaching people how to run an ideation workshop, teaching Japanese managers. So for example, I wrote an article on LinkedIn about how to lead a performance review. So if anyone is either working in a Japanese team or has a Japanese manager and is doing a performance review, that, career counseling kind of situation, I wrote an article on how you can use a customer journey map to actually run a career counselor session, because often it's not about that, your Japanese team or your Japanese manager don't care. It's they don't have the tools because they never learned themselves. There's no recipe that, to follow. So there's really that pre-sales or HR. Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to the text, which is, do you believe that Japan have the ability to evolve and stop using facts? Do I believe that? Sure, I absolutely believe that. because they've done it before. They've done it many, many times before. And this example, for example, that I spoke with the head of marketing at Dropbox yesterday, Dropbox Japan, he, you know, has a business case. And one thing that we see in Japan is once you have a success story, it's very easy to then convince other people. The most difficult thing is that initial success story. Now we have that initial success story. I think we will be able to see more and more, not only government organizations, but also corporate organizations utilize technology in the workplace. And also the reason why I believe that Japan can change is because it's a country that can change. It just is a country that changes on a very different timeline to Western culture. So Western culture is go in, fail fast, you know, but Japan is like, hang on a second, let's see what this is and then change. So I believe Japan will change, but I don't think, I think we'll still see faxes for probably like another 5 years.
That goes back to what you said, that they kind of actually work on the long term, right? In the long run. Yeah. I think that I feel that. I think everyone else is going to feel it as well who has lived in Japan or worked in Japan. There was also another question. To what level of Japanese do you think to what level of Japanese do you think you need to run a starter designing thinking workshop?
Are you the facilitator, as in you're the facilitator, or you're the participant?
Maybe Anthony, you can ask your question directly if you want. Unmute yourself and show yourself.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yes.
Oh, hi. Sorry, there's other people in the room, so I don't want to embarrass them, but I was just I was interested as a facilitator.
Okay,
so,
sure. Mm-hmm. So I'll answer this very quickly. It kind of depends. So we've all been in situations where the person presenting has spoken your native language and you're thinking, I don't get what this person is talking about at all. And they're not helping me understand either. So, you know, and even in your own native language. So I would say that you need a level of Japanese that you don't need to understand everything, but you do need to be able to, you know, kind of follow the conversation. And I think there's a few ways that you can get around doing this. So facilitation, the best thing about facilitation versus a presentation is that facilitation doesn't require that you do the majority of the talking. The facilitation requires that you do probably 5% of the talking. And of an hour, probably you're speaking for 5 minutes. You want 55 minutes of the, you know, if you think about that ratio, 5 minutes talking, 55 minutes working. So I would say that you don't really need that. So considering that you don't need, you know, that to be talking that much, what you do need though is an ability to read the room. You definitely need to be at naka kuki o yomimasu. You need to be able to understand what's going on, who's talking, who's not talking, who needs support, who doesn't need support. And the other thing you can do if you want to facilitate a Japanese workshop in Japanese, but you don't feel comfortable, is utilize visuals. Japanese are very visual people. You know, think about manga. You know, even the essence of kanji is more of a picture, you know, than a word. You know, think about the kanji for mountain, right? Think about a kanji for mountain, yama. Imagine reading the word mountain in English and seeing the kanji mountain. Ask an alien which is more likely to be mountain. You're like, what, this is M, or what is this word? You know, it wouldn't make any sense. So Japanese are very visual. So, you know, use that to your advantage and have all your instructions written out. And then, but obviously you need to be able to have that level that you can support people. But if you're concerned about, that instruction, write it out, use posters, use visualizations that you can use even before you walk into the workshop room. Okay.
Yeah. That sounds good. Also, someone said a good way to describe the Japanese preference for stability and reliability is to say, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Do you think that's true? Does it? Do you feel like that has truth to it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And also, if anyone was wondering what the kanji for the mountain was, Kado-san wrote it. So Kado-san, arigatou gozaimasu. If we think about if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's very true. But we're now in a situation that has been true, and that is very true in a lot of, I would say, Japanese circumstances. But what we're trying to do is move from a model of Kaizen to innovation. The reason that we want to move from a model of Kaizen to innovation is because Kaizen implies that what we're doing is the right thing, right? What we're doing is the right thing, and how we do it is okay. We've just got to find a way that we do it better. However, COVID-19 has basically done the equivalent of 20 years work for all of us, especially for me, right? So what COVID-19 says is, Kaizen is not going to be enough. We need to think of new ways to bring in either resources into the company, be it cash, be it people, or whatever it is, but we need to think of new ways, because think about, running projects now. Let's not even think about innovation projects or innovation initiatives. Companies right now are having to cut projects or cut initiatives because there's not enough essentially resources or cash in the workplace or in the organization to be able to fuel all of the projects, right, that we thought that were going to be. Think about if you're in this organization and you're like, okay, we're just going to cost save. No matter how much cost saving you do, you're not going to find the same amount of money that you need to implement these new projects or to implement these initiatives in cost saving. You need to find new ways to bring in resources into the company. So I do think that if it ain't broke, don't fix it is certainly a lot of the Japanese model. But what we want to do is we want to encourage the Japanese organization to understand that we're not looking for disruptive change. We're looking to build an incumbent organization, right? And so an incumbent organization is an organization that has mainstream business, right? So for example, we don't need to tell Toyota, you know what, forget cars, just forget it, No, what we want to do is we want to be able to go to the mainstream organization and leverage their assets to create new spin-offs or to create new organizations. So for example, that's where you'll see Toyota then open up like an innovation lab or things like that. So we want to take the assets of the mainstream business, maybe that's people, maybe that's customers, maybe that's software, maybe whatever that is, and we want to be able to take that and repurpose it for new initiatives, so that we do create the enough fuel for the future. So it's true that they broke, don't fix it, but I also don't think we have to change everything at the same time. So to find that balance.
Yeah, finding the balance is always, I think, one of the key things in life, actually, in general. I want to give the attendees still the chance to ask some questions directly to Brittany. You have the chance now. Just unmute yourself.
Hi, Brittany, and hi, everyone. I'm Joel from Melbourne. I just have a question about, are you talking about, so there are these old Japanese companies and you want to kind of add like a new style touch, like entrepreneurship touch and like startup kind of feel to these old companies and make the new generation kind of come in and like make it better to compete with the rest of the world, or is that what you're talking about? Because I'm very new on these kind of ideas of business and collaboration and stuff, but yeah.
No, thank you for your question. The idea or the real benefit of Japan is to be able to leverage the history and the existing businesses. And also Japan is a very cash-rich country, which means, one thing, for example, that startups don't have is they don't have capital and they don't have support. Whereas if you play your cards right in Japan, you can really leverage and you can have access to quite a lot of capital and quite a lot of support, particularly in networks and introductions and things like that. So what we're trying to do is, rather than saying this is good or this is bad, what we're trying to do is look at which part of the businesses are working well. Okay, that's great. And how might we be able to work in a new way that even catalyzes or even makes what we're doing even better. So I don't think that organizations have to completely change or they have to become a startup. What we want is we want to take the essence of a startup, which is speed, often passion, and collaboration. And we want to implement that to a Japanese organization. So if we think about implementing speed, collaboration, and passion to a company that has extensive resources and extensive stakeholder networks, imagine the kind of change that we'll be able to make compared to a startup of 4 people working out of their kitchen. You know what I mean? So we're trying to find how might we be able to do both.
Okay, that's great. I think there's a company called Icebreakers. I don't know if that's in relation to a giant Japanese company, but I don't know if you know about that company. I think they do like space projects and stuff. And compared to like JAXA and iSpace, I think iSpace would work better with the modern times. Yeah, I don't know if that's what it.
Sure, well, go ahead and let us know in the chat what it is. And I think I saw another hand. Dean, I think I saw your hand, right?
Okay, there I am. Hi, how you doing? Yes, yes. My question kind of goes back to what Arif was saying before, and it kind of has been answered a little bit anyway with what you've been saying, Brittany, but I'll ask the question anyway. When you are holding these sessions, or when you're planning to hold sessions like this, or even if you're just in your own organization and you're thinking about introducing concepts of design thinking and things like that to your Japanese co-workers, do you find that you have a lot of resistance from them? And if so, especially the higher ups, and if so, how do you go about mitigating that sort of resistance?
Yeah, thanks. That's such a great point. Often, I would really encourage, each person to think about what their environment is. So I've walked into rooms where I've run a design thinking workshop and I haven't said, this is a design thinking workshop, because they're like, we've called it a feedback session or, something like that. So often I find just leading through your, modeling behavior, I find is the easiest thing to do. So rather than, going and kind of checking in with everyone, just at your next meeting, something that you could do is at the beginning say, okay, we have 10 minutes. Let's take the first 10 minutes of this meeting for everyone to write down their number 1 question or the thing that they need answered before we leave. Right? And then everyone will do it. Okay, great. So now we have these 3 points. We know that, we have to cover these 3 points on the agenda before we leave. So I would encourage you to model the behavior and also just to implement it, in little steps. At the same time, see if there's kind of like a senior person that you can do a little bit of nemawashi with, so that you can kind of, implement this new way of working in the organization. But I would say, just go ahead and implement it in your day as much as possible. And the most simple way for me is to say, okay, when we do questions, for example, get people to write it down, and that way you can, and then people will say, hang on, I really enjoyed how we ran that session. And then they'll come back to you for more. And so I would say, could do that on a consistent basis. And, we can certainly talk offline about how to do that in other ways. And then, you'll get there. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much for the questions. Being a bit aware of the time, maybe we have time for 1 more, 2 more questions, depending on how long they are. So feel free to go ahead and ask.
Brittany?
Sure.
Yeah, I just have a quick question now with the post-COVID environment, the now norm. What are some tips maybe you can provide on how to do this virtually?
Right.
I'm in a global organization. Everything's video conference.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-COVID, the Japanese would fly to US for a meeting for 1 day and return, right?
Yeah, crazy.
So it's very busy, ineffective, inefficient too. We do want to utilize the virtual realm, right? We can have breakout rooms with Zoom, but I'm not sure how to do the write-outs, right? We'll use Microsoft Teams where we can set up a whiteboard, but I don't know the best technologies to help facilitate this. And I think they're emerging.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I think that it's actually, you can even utilize it even it's exactly as you mentioned. Sometimes, we'd have these situations where you would fly to the US for a day, or they would fly, you'd fly to Japan for a day and things like that. what we can, and this is kind of a sign of showing respect, showing that this relationship is important. That's kind of a little bit behind it. What we can do is utilize the fact that you're not allowed to travel, that literally the Japanese borders are closed, and that you can say, okay, let's run this online. And what you might be able to do is leverage that rather than having these long meetings where you're like, okay, when are we going to get to the point? When are we going to get to the point? What you might be able to do is, instead of having that one shot at success, one shot at, the goal, what you might be able to do is say, let's connect for 45 minutes each week over the next 4 weeks. And then, after the, at the end of the month, let's then, review where we are. So that actually might work in your favor rather than having to go jet lagged, tired. What are they saying? Oh my gosh, what's going on? Do you know what I mean? So you might actually be able to leverage the technology in a better way. Another thing is, Japanese are more likely to say or to participate when you can leverage like written language. Using chat, does anyone have any questions? Or things like when you're working, using cloud technologies, as you're having the discussion, have someone writing, the to-dos, things like that, and people are following along, that you're on the same page. And so I would do that for it to be, how you can leverage the technology side of things. And then the other side of things is also very much, I spoke to a very senior Japanese leader, and he said the thing that he misses the most is that he can't just go to somebody's desk and just talk rubbish for like 10 minutes. He's like, I can't send someone an email and be like, let's just talk, baka na hanashi, let's just talk stupid things for like, 5 minutes. I can't send someone an email and be like, let's just talk stupid, So, there's that as well. So try to find ways that you can still have that humanity. Things like, asking people like, how are you? And then to put their, like this, to put like an emoji in the chat and things like this. So I would encourage definitely to use things like cloud technologies to make that communication easier. And also they have Google Translate in front of them, if they're on a computer. And so they might feel more comfortable asking their questions, putting it in Google Translate, copy paste, put it in the document. So you do miss that kind of face-to-face nomikai element of it. But at the same time, I think that'll come back sometime. But in the meanwhile, we might be able to take a few steps that can really build the foundation for the next, for the next projects. All right. If anyone has any questions, then you can contact me offline as well. So you don't have to.
I've just shared your contact details already in the chat, so definitely check it out there. You can always find her on LinkedIn, as she said. You can also contact the TA eTrack Alumni Association if you like. I've also left the email address there. The handle itself just works for Instagram and Facebook because someone asked. So Brittany, thanks so much for the insights. I really enjoyed this webinar. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you to everyone. It was such a pleasure getting to know you. So let's, again, the most special thing about these kinds of webinars is to get to know each other. So make sure you go back up to the chat, and connect with people on LinkedIn, because it's a really special place, being these kind of, Japanese global professionals working together, changing the world. We're a small community, but I think if we stick together, we'll get there.
All right, I think.
Bye, everyone.
Answered well. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
お疲れ様です。ありがとうございます。